Half of all marriages end in divorce. And that's no coincidence. Most people in the world dream of finding their soulmate and living happily ever after. But something about marriage as it exists today simply isn't working. Both Freud and Osho claimed that monogamy isn't natural for humans. But what if they missed something crucial about human nature? Could there be a connection between monotheism and monogamy? And on the same token, between polyamory and polytheism? What would you do if you discovered there's a real way to find your soulmate and stay joyfully married forever? So whether you're single and want to find a love that lasts, or you're married but the honeymoon phase is over, or you've tried counseling and all sorts of therapies without success, what you're about to discover will completely change how you look at love and marriage. Join us for the lecture, The Truth About Joyful Monogamy, which sheds new light on building loving relationships and reveals the great secret to a joyfully ever after marriage.
This podcast was originally recorded in Hebrew and features AI-generated English dubbing. The voices are not those of the original speaker.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome, especially to all of you who have joined us today for the first time. So, our topic today is marriage or a romantic relationship from the higher perspective of the light. Let's begin with a brief introduction. Is it possible to be married and happy? Before we dive deep into the essence of a relationship that brings eternal happiness, we will need to first explore some important topics so that we can lay the correct foundation for understanding the great secret to a joyful monogamous relationship. So, whether you are single men or women who haven't yet made the most important choice of whom to marry, because this is truly the most important choice we can make in our earthly lives, or whether you are a young couple already beginning to recognize the gap between the wedding day and daily life, or whether you have been together longer and are debating whether to divorce or carry on for the children's sake, or whether you are a couple that has already gone to various couples therapies and knows, emotionally and intellectually, what needs to be done but still doesn't feel there's actual change. This lecture actually reveals the great secret to an eternally joyful relationship. In fact, it's a very, very simple secret. But as I said at the beginning of my words, we'll need to wait a bit and build the correct foundation. Chapter 1. So here's the first chapter. Is there one single truth? This may seem unrelated to marriage, but it connects to the opening word of this lecture's title. The lecture begins with the truth, so we must ask, is there actually one truth, and why is understanding this so crucial? This matters because we're living in an era called postmodernism, whether we realize it or not. According to postmodernist thought, there is no single truth. And soon we'll get to an explanation of why we live in a period where there's supposedly no one truth, and certainly not the truth with a capital T. Very often on social networks, people write to me, "What do you mean about one truth? There is no one truth. What do you mean when you say the truth is yours? Why do you think you're better than others?" So today, I'll finally have a chance to explain this. By the way, if we also think there's no eternal truth, then obviously this raises the question, can there be marriages that last forever? Okay, so let's review some history. Modernism, which began in the 19th century and lasted until the mid-20th century, believed it was possible to discover objective, rational, and universal truth that would lead humanity toward progress. That was their core belief. In contrast, postmodernism, which followed, promotes skepticism and casts doubt on everything. It embraces relativism, meaning everything is relative, and pluralism, which means multiple opinions. In other words, postmodernism holds that there is no single truth. So, how did we shift from modernism to postmodernism? This transition resulted from several key factors. First was disillusionment with the grand promises of the 20th century. 2 world wars, the Holocaust, the atomic bomb, the Cold War, all of these demonstrated that faith in science, technology, and progress didn't lead the world to a better place, contrary to modernism's promises. Second was the criticism of authority. Powerful institutions like the church, the state, and academia began losing credibility due to claims that they primarily served those in power. Third was media's influence. We became consumed by television, and especially today, by the internet and AI. This created a reality of images where distinguishing between what's real and what's fake became increasingly difficult. The final factor was globalization. Encounters between different cultures revealed that there are many different ways to think and live. Let me summarize this in one sentence, since today I'm not giving a lecture specifically on the differences between modernism and postmodernism. If modernism believed that there were answers to questions of human existence and one rational, universal truth, then postmodernism questions the very validity of those questions themselves. This is the cultural atmosphere we all live in, even if you're hearing about this concept for the first time. Therefore, anyone who speaks about one truth, or the truth with a capital T, immediately provokes antagonism. People perceive them as fanatics or anachronists. You're not up to date, you haven't updated your worldview, there's no such thing as one truth anymore. Or they sense it carries the scent of outdated idealism. So this revulsion is actually understandable as long as we're viewing history through the lens of the intellectual and the emotional consciousness. For those hearing this for the first time, I recommend watching additional videos on our YouTube channel. Currently, human beings possess 3 types of consciousness, which is very strange indeed. It's actually a distortion. We have intellectual consciousness, we have emotional consciousness, and we have just a tiny bit of spiritual consciousness. But we were meant to possess only spiritual consciousness, with the intellect and emotions serving as executors of the Spirit's will. I explain all of this at length in other lectures. I'm just quickly bringing up to speed those who are hearing this for the first time today. If we look at reality purely from the intellectual and emotional angles, then the transition from modernism to postmodernism is justified, because the intellectual consciousness in modernism truly disappointed. This led to the counter-reaction of the emotional consciousness in postmodernism, which recoils from anyone who claims to speak in the name of the truth. However, neither modernism nor the postmodernist backlash considered that there's an additional consciousness, the spiritual consciousness. For the spiritual consciousness, there absolutely is one truth that is objective and eternal. And this is precisely the message of the new era, of the new world. People who are already sensitive or students of Alma can sense the early signs of this revolution, a shift that will bring forth a new human being with one spiritual consciousness. Then we'll finally be able to perceive that there really is one single truth. So, to give you an example, showing the beginning signs of this shift. In neuroscience and many psychological disciplines, consciousness has traditionally been regarded as something that necessarily stems from the body and brain. Today, even mainstream science is beginning to question this assumption. Furthermore, as science advances beyond quantum physics, it may well discover what ancient peoples already knew, that there exists a consciousness which does not originate in the brain, does not perish at death, but is eternal. The source of its connection to our physical body is the solar plexus. This is the spirit. And whoever begins to develop this spiritual consciousness will discover that there is one single truth. This truth, as perceived through the lens of spiritual consciousness, never changes its form. It cannot be subject to progress or change, because it has been perfect from the very beginning of time, and will remain so for all eternity. The truth we speak of is the will of God, expressed through His perfect laws of creation, upon which the entire cosmos is founded and sustained. Cosmos in Greek means order. If the cosmos were subject to even the slightest change, and did not operate according to absolute fixed laws, then everything would collapse. This concept can be seen beautifully in the Hebrew language. In Hebrew, the word for truth, emet, is composed of 3 letters. The first letter, aleph, is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The second letter, mem, is the middle letter. And the last letter, tav, is the final letter of the alphabet. So the word itself symbolically represents existence from beginning to end. This parallels the ancient Greek term alpha and omega, 2 very well-known letters. Alpha is the first, omega is the last, and together they symbolize in many traditions beginning and end, meaning the perfection of divine truth. So, what we actually see is that the concept of truth has been severely distorted. It has degenerated from an absolute concept originating from divinity to a relative concept dependent on various changing human opinions. Instead of man striving to discover what God's truth is, he invented all kinds of truths. This is postmodernism, where everyone can choose the truth most convenient to their weaknesses. This is what happens today. There are many truths, and everyone chooses the truth that suits their weaknesses. It's deeply ironic that the very verse in Scripture, "Every man did that which was right in his own eyes," a sentence the prophets used as rebuke against the anarchy where everyone does what he wants, has become the slogan of postmodernism. Everyone will do what they feel like, what suits them. There is no one truth. But, and I have pointed this out often before, the laws of creation, which are divine truth, don't ask us whether we believe in them or not, whether it's convenient for us to accept them or inconvenient, whether they fit our opinions or don't fit our opinions. Please understand, the entire debate between modernism and postmodernism takes place only in the material consciousness, the emotions and the intellect. So there you can indeed argue. But when we speak of spiritual consciousness and divine truth, there's no room for argument. Whether a person believes there's a law of karma or doesn't believe really doesn't matter, and nobody cares, because the law of karma will operate on them whether they believe in it or not. So this period will also help all of us learn a bit more humility and come down from our pedestal of arrogance, where we think we can invent the world and invent the laws. The task of humanity, of us, in the new age, is not to invent laws, but to identify the laws of creation and build upon them. Then we won't have any disputes or problems, and we'll have harmony and prosperity in every area of our lives. The intellect and emotions love to live according to their truth. We already know this. And we know we're not going to deal with them, because that's not what Alma came to bring to the world. The aspect we're speaking of revives the spirit immediately. Just as water revitalizes the body, so does the truth instantly awaken the spirit to life. And everyone who hears the truth, the word of the Lord, his spirit awakens, his spirit is drawn to it. If the other 2 consciousnesses, which are very afraid of losing their control, don't interfere, a person can grasp the truth simply and quickly without any further explanations. But since we have 2 jailers, the intellect and the emotions, we need to help the spirit break free from them. Let's move on from this introduction. I hope you now understand what truth I'm talking about. By the way, the truth I'm speaking of is not Hagit Rabbi's truth, it's not Alma's truth, and it's not some theory or method I invented. This truth is the laws of creation. This is the truth we're discussing. So, now that we understand this point, let's return to today's topic. Chapter 2. The attack on monogamous marriage, Freud and Osho. Let's explain the attack on monogamous marriage and why today, in our era of modern postmodernism, monogamous marriage seems like something from the past that no one believes in anymore. We'll talk about Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychology, and about Osho. Those who haven't heard of him will soon learn about his erroneous teachings. If the spirit listens to the title, The Truth About Joyful Monogamy, it knows this is truth. Why? Because the spirit in its very essence is monogamous. Therefore, the spirit carefully chooses the one who completes it on the journey of ascent toward the light. And then it shuts its door, looking indifferently at anyone else knocking, trying to woo it. For those who truly have found their match made in heaven, and will explain this later, it's clear that monogamy is the way. They have no conflicts, no problems, they don't search for alternative truths. The spirit finds its complement and shuts the door. Even more than this, I say. For a developed spirit, marriage is not just an until death do us part bond, but a covenant that continues even after death, in the world of souls, also called the ethereal world. Many times, couples fortunate enough to share such a high spiritual connection will reunite in future incarnations. Their spirits will recognize at first sight the eternal bond of true love between them, and they'll simply continue from the exact place where they last parted on earth. Although in most cases they won't be able to explain it, since not all of us can remember previous lifetimes. But people definitely describe this feeling of knowing each other from somewhere before. Since the spirit isn't limited by time and space, it doesn't matter whether 2,000 years, 100 years, or 50 years have passed since they were last together, the spirit picks up exactly where it left off. It's only our body, emotions, and intellect that don't remember. So, the spirit is profoundly monogamous. In contrast to the spirit, who do you think is not monogamous? I'm sure many of you can answer this question. Of course, the intellect is not monogamous. The intellect looks around and analyzes. He's richer. Oh, he's smarter. Oh, she's more beautiful. Oh, she's younger. The intellect is not monogamous. It always seeks something better, an upgraded version. So, whoever's relationship is based on intellect will clearly have great difficulty being monogamous. What about relationships based on emotions? The emotional consciousness and emotions are also not monogamous. Emotions, by their nature, are very volatile. One day I love, the next day I hate. And that's why couples therapists have so much work. It's not a stable foundation. The body and our instincts, our sexual instincts, clearly are not monogamous either. By the way, that's why most animals are not monogamous. Their connection isn't spiritual. It's an instinctive connection for the purpose of reproduction and nothing more. But here's what's really funny, and this truly makes me laugh. People try to justify their open marriages based on dolphins. They tell me, the dolphin isn't monogamous, so why should we be? But wait, how is man distinguished from beast? How is a human different from a dolphin? A dolphin has no spirit, so obviously it cannot be monogamous. I've already given you the key point here that will help you understand everything. Before we continue, and we have much more to say today, let me summarize. The spirit is monogamous. The rest of our parts, being material, are not monogamous. And from here, begin all the problems that people face in their relationships and marriages. Marriages that don't originate and develop from a spiritual connection will inevitably lead people to one of four options. Option 1, divorce. Option 2, infidelity. Option 3, alternative arrangements like open marriages. Or option 4, enduring each other in misery. But they cannot describe a situation where they can truly be happy forever, with no desire for anything else. This is only possible when marriage is rooted in a spiritual connection. Since I know this is not the situation with most people, we now need to explain why. And this brings us to another important concept. We will enter today the esoteric dome, which I discuss frequently in my recent lectures. The esoteric dome, for those listening for the first time, is that place where all people who seek the truth are drawn to. They're seeking something, let's say something beyond matter. They're looking upward for a moment, lifting their gazes, seeking something beyond the material world. But because they don't have the appropriate spiritual consciousness, they fall victim to all the false teachers and false prophets in this esoteric dome. Today, we will present two of them and expose them, Freud and Osho, and explain why they belong to this dome. So, whoever lacks spiritual consciousness must understand that there are many traps set by the darkness on the path to the truth. Let us continue our story. There's an ongoing rise in divorce rates, and we see this in all corners of the world. It seems that monogamy, which comes from mono, meaning one in Greek, and gamos, meaning marriage, is becoming a thing of the past. The countless jokes about marriage in all languages and cultures testify to this. I've witnessed this in the different places I've lived. I saw this one post on social media. Even in the grave, they don't stop fighting. The original version was, even in the grave, she doesn't stop yelling at him, but we changed it to be gender neutral. In South America, for example, the Spanish word for wife, esposa, also means handcuffs. And the same for husband, esposo. This means that when people get married, they're essentially putting handcuffs on each other. South America, Germany, Israel, everywhere they laugh at the institution of marriage. And why? Because it's no longer an inspiring institution, and many young people today say they don't want to get married at all. Why? Because they look at their parents' marriage, and it's not something they want to experience. Already in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, saw monogamous marriage as a problematic institution. He said marriage suppresses our natural polygamous tendencies, creates psychological tensions, and there's nothing that can be done about it. It's a necessary evil needed for society to function. Sounds appealing to get married according to Freud, doesn't it? Really makes you want to rush to the altar, right? Now, what was Freud's method? Let's analyze it for a moment and break it down. Freud examined his patients' dreams, especially sexual dreams, and reached the conclusion that a person's inner world is built of three parts. First, there's the id, which is the unconscious drive motivated by instincts and immediate desires. Freud didn't say this, but I will. The id is not monogamous. The id sees someone, a woman for example, gets excited, and as far as it's concerned would be physical with the entire world. Then there's the superego, which is the inner moral compass representing societal and ethical values. According to our framework, the superego is monogamous. Its perspective is that there's nothing to be done. We need to preserve the family and religion, so the superego aligns with internalized societal expectations. Finally, we have the third part. In Freudian psychoanalysis, it's called the ego. The ego is the rational part that mediates between the id and reality. For our purposes, The ego submits to monogamy because society requires it, but secretly continues to fantasize about polygamy. Take a moment to review Freud's theory and reflect on what's missing. Why did he reach this conclusion? What's missing? The spirit. The spirit is missing, so his entire theory is flawed because it's built solely on matter. So let's correct Freud's errors. The spirit is not the superego. It doesn't operate according to external social and moral values like religions, for example. Instead, it is naturally guided by internal values derived from the eternal light of truth. Let me give you an example to illustrate the difference. According to Freud's system, a person doesn't steal. And why? Because he doesn't want God to punish him, because he's afraid of the law of karma, bringing punishment back to him, because he's afraid of getting caught and going to prison. So he doesn't steal. In contrast, when we talk about a developed spirit, it won't steal, not because it fears any punishment from anyone, but because a developed spirit would never want to harm someone else. This is natural to it. And likewise with thou shalt not commit adultery, and likewise thou shalt not covet, and so on. These principles are innate and natural to the developed spirit. Its nature is good, its nature is pure. When our spirit is not developed, then we have to be compelled, with the help of the intellect, with what Freud called rational consciousness, to behave according to societal standards, social values, and external messages. But this is only because our spirit is undeveloped. If our spirit were truly developed, which is the goal of the new era, the end of days, this is the work we need to attain. If the spirit were dominant, people wouldn't experience the inner conflicts that Freud based his entire theory on. They would instead experience perfect inner harmony. The fact that we think this is normal, that we think one thing, feel another, want one thing, and its opposite, this is because we are abnormal creatures, developed not according to the plan of creation. We are creatures that were tempted by the serpent, ate from the tree of knowledge, and split into three consciousnesses. So, psychoanalysis and all the psychological theories that followed, regardless of how much they deviated from Freud, are fundamentally flawed. Freud laid the foundation for defining the inner world of man without the spirit. I gave an example on social media after someone asked me why we say there is one truth. She said she was a therapist who works with spirit, body, and soul. So I asked her a simple question. What is the soul? She couldn't really explain what the soul actually is. She told me its thoughts, its feelings. I said to her, look, first of all, you're missing the main thing in your understanding. If you're treating people and you don't know that the spirit is their engine, their most important component, it's like a heart surgeon opening up a body without knowing where the heart is located. He would kill the person. This is obviously inconceivable. But for some inconceivable reason, we let people treat our essence, our inner world, when they don't even know what this inner world is made of. And especially since they rely solely on theories based on rather questionable observations and investigations, because Freud developed his entire theory based on dreams of people who had all kinds of sexual complexes. He completely removed the essence of what a human being actually is. So, it's clear that with this method and any other method that doesn't understand what spirit is, it's impossible to truly help human beings. Now, Freud was right that monogamy is a necessary compromise, but only because he didn't understand that humans have a spirit. He looked at everything and created his entire theory based on sexual instincts. The same mistake, by the way, was also made by Charles Darwin, the father of evolutionary theory. You surely know what he said, that humans evolved from apes. And this is actually true. Humans and apes do have a common origin in terms of how their physical bodies developed. But what Darwin got wrong, again, just like Freud, is that this physical development is not what defines humanity. If he had read the message of the Grail, then he would have understood that our physical body developed over millions of years, and at a certain moment when this body reached the peak of its development, the first human spirits entered the bodies of these animals, and essentially at that moment, humanity was created. We go into this in much more detail in our school's advanced courses. I'm bringing this up because I'm explaining the mistakes made by people who are considered in our history as innovators of very serious ideas, people whose theories are still followed to this day. They were actually lacking spiritual consciousness, and their entire definition and approach to what a human being is was deficient and flawed from the very beginning. That's the problem with Freud. Now let's see what happened next. The assault on monogamy didn't end with Freud. Remember, Freud believed that monogamy goes against human nature, but he argued we must maintain it anyway, because without monogamy, society itself would collapse. Following Freud, and this is just one example, though a particularly influential one, came Rajneesh Osho, an Indian teacher who lived from 1931 to 1990. His meditation centers remain extremely active worldwide to this day, including his famous center in Pune. He presented himself as a spiritual teacher. I'll soon explain why I put spiritual teacher in quotes, because his teachings were actually far more destructive and dangerous than Freud's, as we will see shortly. Osho took Freud's ideas a few steps further. He argued that since monogamies are natural, we should abandon and abolish it entirely. Society's collapse, the destruction of family structures? He dismissed these concerns, claiming he had a better alternative. Marriage, he declared, is an outdated, obsolete institution, a system of ownership and jealousy where men and women become each other's property, crushing their freedom and authenticity. Now, he was right about this criticism, but the problem isn't that the institution of marriage itself is flawed, but rather that marriage has lost its true foundation, according to the plan of creation, which is a genuine spiritual connection between the partners. And then, instead of lifelong commitment, Osho proposed a different model: open relationships. Relationships that develop naturally until the love ends. But what does love ends actually mean? This is earthly love we're talking about, so of course it ends eventually. When the love ends, each person is free to replace his or her partner, absolute sexual freedom. The commune replaces the nuclear family. Everyone becomes parents to everyone. These women are mothers to those children. These men are fathers to those children. He encouraged sexual relations with as many partners as possible. But more than that, Osho claimed this whole model was actually a path to spiritual development. Meaning, it's not just moving from bed to bed because we feel like it. This is supposedly what will help us develop spiritually. Now think about this. There are many people who are genuinely searching, but their intuition, which is the voice of the spirit, isn't developed enough yet to say no to this approach. Because anyone who has developed intuition doesn't need the explanations I'm giving now or the analysis I'm about to present. They simply understand that something here doesn't belong. By the way, it's exactly like drugs. People who have developed intuition will never approach these things. Not ayahuasca, not psychedelic drugs, not hypnosis, nothing. Most people don't have developed intuition, so they go and experiment with these things and cause themselves damage that's very hard to repair. Because it's not just physical damage, it's a flaw in their soul body. I'll explain exactly what that means shortly. I'm going to address all the false esoteric teachers and all the mistakes found in their teachings so that people who are genuinely seeking God and genuinely seeking the truth, who truly want to know what we are here for, will be able to find the right, straight path. We are actually drilling through what I call the esoteric dome. Imagine a closed dome where all the seekers trapped within it run around from method to method, never finding the truth, because this is a dome of lies. We're drilling through it from below so that through this opening, true seekers can look up and find God and the light of truth, the truth of God. So, Osho is an extremely dangerous teacher because he didn't just break down the institution of marriage. I repeat this again. He actually claimed that this approach was a path to spiritual development. If we compare Freud and Osho, we see that Freud dealt with human sexual needs through the intellectual consciousness. He was purely an intellectual. Osho, on the other hand, dealt with human sexual needs through the emotional consciousness. Only he called it spirit. In any case, neither of them actually dealt with the true, eternal human spirit. And this brings us to the main trap in the esoteric dome, calling emotions and instincts that belong to the soul body spirit. But the soul body is not our spirit. It's finer matter, yes, but it's still matter. To call all of this spirit is deceptively false. Go back to our lecture, Lucifer's Agenda, where I explained that people who wander in the esoteric dome have the illusion that they've found the spirit. Most seekers end up there, and they remain bound there. What is the clear sign that a person has not found the truth? That he is still searching. So, I have a question for people on social networks who follow us yet argue with our messages. Why are you still listening to my lectures and following me if you claim to possess the truth yourself? If you've already found the truth, then what are you coming here to search for? I personally am not searching anymore. I found the truth. Therefore, I have nothing to search for. Just like when I found my husband, my partner, I have not looked for anyone else. Only someone who has not found the real truth continues to search and has no peace. If someone found God, why would he go searching anywhere else? Do you think he needs to find another God? If someone found the light, what else could he possibly be searching for? So, the fact that you are still searching means you don't have the truth, despite being teachers or therapists or having many certifications or degrees. There are people who join the school or meet me at lectures, and they tell me with embarrassment that they haven't taken any spiritual courses or studied anything previously. And I tell them, that's wonderful, because their path to the luminous heights will be much faster than all the people who have completed 1,001 courses and certifications. It will be very hard for those people's ego to give up all that accumulated information and status. However, to truly attain the truth, there is no choice but to put all these things aside and start from the beginning to learn the truth. Later, if there are things we previously learned that align with the truth, then we can add them back. But one of the biggest problems that truth seekers have today, and also people who hear me in lectures to the general public, is that they insist on clinging to the teachings found in the esoteric dome. What do I mean by they insist? Their spirit is very happy when they hear the truth, so they come and continue to listen. But their ego doesn't want to let go. It's difficult for the ego to agree. Do you expect the ego will simply take down from the wall all the certificates it achieved and start from zero? The ego doesn't like this. But I also had to do this when I found the truth. Only I did it joyfully. When I found the truth that was greater than what I thought was the truth, because for many years I thought the truth was Judaism, I had to make this choice. I thought Judaism was the truth, but I kept searching and searching and searching. I searched everywhere until I found the real truth. And the moment I found it, I said, good, this is the real truth. Everything I knew up to that point, I would subordinate to this truth. So the process I ask students who come to school to do, I also did myself. Let's return to Osho and his theory about polyamory. The gap between his theory and the actual experience of his followers in his commune was enormous. Beyond the claim that free sexuality was part of the control mechanism in his commune, the absence of clear relationship boundaries left people deeply confused. All the connections among the people staying there were profoundly unhealthy. Children didn't know who their father was or who their mother was, and people were generally very unstable. Anyone who lives this way cannot be a stable person. They cannot be productive. In most cases, this lifestyle is combined with drugs, because really, it's impossible to get through all this Sodom and Gomorrah unless you completely silence the spirit with substances. There were also serious allegations against Osho that women were especially harmed by all this so-called sexual freedom. These claims don't surprise me at all. I'll explain shortly why women are hurt more than men in open relationships. The darkness has very beautiful names for all its deviations: open, free. Of course, the darkness won't tell the truth. It always disguises its distortions with beautiful words. So, what happens to us when we're in relationships where sexuality is disconnected from spiritual connection, from love? First, I'll explain this generally, and then I'll explain why women are particularly more vulnerable when they enter these types of relationships that teachers like Osho promote. The sexual experience, contrary to what all kinds of teachers claim, cannot lead you to God. Sex doesn't lead to God, and sex is not a spiritual thing. Sex belongs to the physical body. It's a need of the physical body. When we're no longer in physical bodies, we won't need sex. So, anyone who teaches that through sexual encounters you can reach heaven, see angels, see the stars, is like someone who claims that through psychedelic drugs you can reach God. Absolutely not. But this is a topic of a different lecture explaining this in detail. For now, I'll say generally that you can neither reach God nor even the spiritual sphere, which is our origin, our home, with the help of drugs. If that were possible, Jesus would have told us about this. Moses would have told us. Jeremiah would have told us. Buddha would have told us. So don't cite examples from shamans of primitive tribes who wrongly have developed the consciousness of demons and called them gods. I explain and elaborate on this more in the lecture on natural disasters, so you can learn more about this topic there. But let's return for a moment to our topic, which is sexuality. At the peak of a sexual encounter, we actually have an experience where the body is released. This is the most refined experience that our physical body can have. During this experience, the connection between soul and body becomes temporarily loosened. At this moment, without the protection of spiritual love between the partners, the individuals become vulnerable because of this loosened connection and lack of the protection of the love, and open themselves to dark entities that surround planet Earth, entities that are waiting for opportunities to attach themselves and draw power from unprotected souls. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about demons and phantoms and all kinds of low spirits here, but people who engage in sexual activity without the protection of true love between the partners often experience emptiness, confusion, anger, and behavior that's very foreign to them afterward. They don't understand why they suddenly behave this way, but it's because they open themselves to the influence of these dark entities. And here's the danger. And this is why women specifically are harmed more by all these methods. The danger is greater for women because a woman, in her essence, even if she's super modern, has a much more refined sexual experience than a man. A man is inherently more dense or coarser than a woman. For a woman to experience sexual intimacy, she also needs to open her soul. Therefore, if she is in relationships that are not based on true spiritual love, the woman is more open to these dark influences. So, if we summarize the perspectives of Freud and Osho for a moment, we'll see that marriage, according to Freud, becomes a prison for the partners, a compromise you accept reluctantly because you have no other choice. On the other hand, romantic relationships, according to Osho's method, lead to something worse: complete chaos driven by emotions and impulses. And this option, although it seems more exciting, is much more dangerous because it legitimizes the Sodom and Gomorrah of our time under the guise of spiritual development. Let's move on to our third chapter: monogamy and monotheism, polyamory and polytheism, and see that all these methods of open marriages and polyamory are actually modern versions of something that existed in ancient times. We'll see this when we compare monogamy and monotheism to polyamory and polytheism. Both Freud and Osho did not believe in God, and we'll soon see how this is closely connected to their entire sexual philosophy and their understanding of marriage. Freud was an atheist, an intellectual, so we can easily understand that. His strong intellect apparently prevented him from seeing through the false association, the wrong connection between religion and God. Religion and God are two completely different things, and we must understand this as something fundamental, because when I say I believe in God, people ask me, are you religious? What is your religion? Are you Christian? Are you Jewish? I don't belong to any religion. This false association between religion and God has led many people to reject belief in God entirely. This was apparently Freud's situation as well. Lacking spiritual consciousness, he became an atheist. Osho, of course, was far more dangerous. He claimed, where is God located? God is within us. God is not a father with a beard. Well, he was right about that last part, but he always begins with truth and then twists it into deception. He presented divinity as an inner reality, as a state of consciousness. If I observe people and their methods from the perspective of the light, I always say, if it weren't tragic, it would be laughable. Man believes he is God, and Osho claimed, everyone can attain this state of divine consciousness, God is within us, and blah, 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 blah. I can't help but laugh at this, so forgive me. He told people, just follow my meditations, practice inner reflection and contemplation, and you'll reach divine consciousness. Who created the world? We, humans did. Yes, we in our inner divine consciousness. As a side note, this is exactly the same tactic that many people use when they discuss the Messiah and claim that Jesus was not the Messiah. Many are Jews, by the way, who already sense that we're living in the days of the final judgment. Well, what can they do? They look at the signs and see that everything happening now in the world matches the prophesied description of the events of the days of the final judgment. But they have a problem. The Messiah isn't coming. He's not showing up, not even calling, and they're starting to get worried. So they came up with a solution, just like Osho. No, the Messiah is not a person. It's a state of consciousness, a messianic consciousness, and everyone can become the Messiah. I hope you can already sense how ridiculous this is. So let's see why the fact that Osho and Freud were atheists, or thought they could be God themselves, directly affected their understanding and view of romantic relationships. For this, we need to go back to ancient times, because Osho, and this is information I received when I wrote this lecture, is actually a reincarnation of a Baal priest. He was a Baal priest in ancient times. Anyone who develops his intuition and looks at Osho's pictures can see it in his eyes, eyes that are completely lacking in purity. Start looking into people's eyes, you will discover many things. And who was this Baal? Osho is a reincarnation of one of his priests. I don't know in which period this was, the information isn't that precise, but he is definitely a reincarnation of one of Baal's priests. Baal is none other than one of Lucifer's most powerful servants. The fallen angel Lucifer descended from the divine sphere, and on his descent, different kinds of entities joined him, including Baal, who is a primordial being, meaning he is extremely powerful. Today, he essentially controls all of humanity, and soon we will see how it has been done after Lucifer's binding. As Lucifer's servant, Baal requires energy, power, sustenance, and he obtains this energy through rituals of sexual debauchery. Sexual temptation thus serves as a tool, converting people to his worship, while distorted desire becomes a means of control and creates dependency. If the world would stop consuming pornography for 24 hours, the darkness would dry up. The darkness needs our energy, our power. It has no power of its own. As I said, after Lucifer's binding, the darkness has nowhere to get power except from human beings. And here lies our greatest failure. We continue the worship of Baal in digital form. We continue to feed it, even without altars. It's not just the elites that we see who worship Baal. You now understand what the essence of these rituals is. These rituals are designed to generate ecstasy, and this ecstasy is energy that feeds the darkness. Therefore, this worship must be repeated again and again and again. The more perverted it is, the more horrible it is. Like, heaven forbid, sacrificing children, the greater the ecstasy from Baal's perspective, and the more significant the energy generated from this worship. But it's not just the elites who are involved, it's everyone who engages in perverted sexuality, like the billions visiting porn sites. So, it's not just the globalist elites. This is humanity's problem. We are feeding Baal. All of planet Earth is under Baal's rule. We are doing this. No one is doing this to us. And therefore, it's crucial that you understand who these esoteric teachers are, what they are really teaching, and where they are leading people. They are simply recreating Sodom and Gomorrah through their workshops, these Tantra workshops, where they teach people to abandon their modesty and sacred boundaries under the guise of openness and freedom. These are nothing more than Sodom and Gomorrah workshops under Lucifer's direction. One must be completely disconnected from the spirit to participate in these things. Women in general, women who frequent these places, are women who have completely lost their connection with higher womanhood. This is a topic I elaborate on in our Queen seminar, which is currently available in Hebrew, and an updated version of this seminar will be available to our international students, hopefully within several months. So, polyamory, swinging, nudism, and orgies are all rituals for the modern Baal. Anyone who participates in these rituals damages his soul body, not his spirit, but creates a very serious flaw in his soul. This damage is very hard to repair, and yet we must do it. Because to dry up the darkness, we must dry up what gives it power, and perverted sexuality is what gives the most power to Baal. Let's examine Baal worship for a moment. Baal worship has very ancient roots, 3000–2000 BCE, during the early Canaanite period. But we know it especially from the biblical period, which is 1200 to 586 BCE. Anyone who reads the Bible sees that the prophets constantly fought against this worship. In my lecture, Prophets versus Empires, I describe their struggle. We have a clear example in 1 Kings chapter 18, the story of Elijah. If you don't know it, go educate yourself and actually learn what happened in our history. Because these cults existed in ancient times. We are simply living in a modern version of them now. In Elijah's time, Elijah confronted the worship of Baal and Asherah. Asherah is Baal's partner, and together they symbolize the polygamous couple that demands polygamous rituals to gain power. And understand, Elijah is alone because the true prophets are murdered and persecuted. Hence, he has to hide, flee from place to place. There are 400 prophets of Baal, 450 prophets of Asherah. These are the numbers. And these proportions don't change. Those who speak the truth are few. Those who spread lies are many. It was always like this, and we'll see this pattern in detail soon. Go read this story. I won't tell it to you because I want you to discover it yourself. See how Elijah defeats them in a spectacular demonstration when he calls upon the elemental forces, the elemental beings, and proves to all the people who had been worshipping these false gods in ecstatic rituals that everything is deception, including all the false prophets, priests, and priestesses who serve them. So, let's see how everything connects now. Monotheism, we already talked about this. Monos means one, and theos means God. Think about monogamy. It comes from the same root. Monotheism and monogamy go hand in hand. One God, one woman, one man. Polytheism is just the opposite. Poly means many, theos means God, multiple gods. And polyamory, same concept, multiple relationships. So it's no surprise that anyone who serves one God practices monogamy, and anyone who serves Baal and Asherah promotes polyamory. In other words, monotheism champions monogamy, while polytheism champions polyamory. Let me put this all together for you. Mono equals the one, always belongs to the light. We have one God. The light operates through oneness. There is one God, there is one truth, there is one woman or one man. One. This is the ideal. Male and female, he created them. Now, I know there are later deviations from this pattern, even in scripture. I'm sure you'll ask me about this during our Q&A session, so I'll save that for then. You'll probably also ask, why did Abraham have 2 wives? And I'll answer that as well during our questions and answers. But the right model, the ultimate ideal, is male and female. He created them. One woman, one man. There is one prophet, the one true prophet of each generation, not many prophets. One. You can also find this story in scripture. Moses was the one true prophet of his generation. He was the prophet of that time. And he received a tremendously challenging mission to free a nation of slaves. Now, getting them out of Egypt, that was actually the easy part. The real problem was transforming their consciousness from a slave mentality, slave consciousness, which is a material consciousness, to the consciousness of free people. He went through countless difficulties with them. Time and again, he said to God, I want to quit. I don't want this job anymore. I'm tired of it. Because the Israelites were constantly complaining. We're cold, we're hot. Why did you take us out? Why did you bring us here? At one point, there was a group, kind of a faction, called Korah and his followers. This faction decided to rebel against Moses. They came to him and said, why only you? Why do you think you're the only holy one, the only leader? We're all holy. And all the people joined in saying, yes, yes, we're all holy. All of us. Moses looked at this and thought to himself, I didn't even want this job. I didn't want this role. I told God he had the wrong person, that he shouldn't choose me. But God insisted. So Moses proposed a test to determine who the real leader was. And there, just like in the story of Elijah and the false prophets of Baal, the elemental beings, which know how to obey people who come from the light and possess higher abilities, put on an incredible display. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed Korah and his entire group. So you see, there aren't many prophets, there aren't many truths, there aren't many gods, and there isn't polyamory, because the light operates through mono, oneness. In contrast, the darkness operates through poly, in multiplicity, through many. There are always multiple idols and goddesses. We don't worship just one idol. There are idols, goddesses, many of them. There are many truths. There are many women. I'm talking about the biblical period. Today there are many men too. But look at King Solomon, for example. One of the reasons his kingdom splits is because he didn't follow the law of the king and took multiple wives who led his heart toward idol worship. By the way, this was David's sin too. David fell at exactly this point. False prophets always appear in multiples. In the esoteric dome, you'll find all kinds of methods, all kinds of teachings, and all kinds of teachers. It's always poly, always multiple, but all of this will come to an end in the final judgment, whether humanity wants it or not. Dear friends, the law of what will happen in the days of the final judgment will bring us all to our knees. We will all bow down and say what the prophet Zechariah said. On that day, the Lord will be one. On that day, meaning the day we are living in now, in the days of the final judgment. The Lord will be one and his name one. And before this one and only truth, we all must bow down if we want to live and be happy. Because this truth was given to us for our happiness, not for our suffering. The poly, the plurality that seems to allow us multiple opinions, multiple relationships, multiple everything, in fact, leads us to suffering. But God is one, and therefore only oneness, unity, can flow from him. If we recognize this, and we have no choice but to recognize it, we will live joyfully. Now we can move forward to chapter 4. We're slowly approaching the great secret of an eternally joyful relationship. Chapter 4. The collapse of the old world marriage. We usually look at what's happening in today's world from the outside. I assume that whoever is listening to this lecture knows that the old world is collapsing. We see this in social structures, in governments, in health systems, in natural disasters. The old world is collapsing because everything false is meant to collapse in the final judgment. This is what's supposed to happen. This is not a sad thing. It's only sad to our emotions and intellect, to the ego. The ego feels sad. But the spirit is happy that all this falsehood is collapsing, even if it is painful, because finally we will have a chance for something real. But what people don't understand is that our false inner structures are collapsing too. That's why we're seeing so many divorces lately, everywhere around the world. People keep asking, why is everyone getting divorced? It is because everything that is wrong and built on falsehood is collapsing, including marriages that were never built on the right foundation from the start. So, it is not just the external matrix that is collapsing. There is also the inner matrix, a consciousness prison created by two wrong material consciousnesses, the intellectual consciousness and the emotional consciousness. And this is the prison that is most important for us to break free from. Now, I won't go into detailed explanation today about the three consciousnesses, since our topic today is different. But we do offer a course, the foundational course in our school, already translated into several languages, and it is called Let My Spirit Go, Strengthening the Spiritual Consciousness in Daily Life. I highly recommend you take it because it explains systematically, in an organized, precise, clear, and simple way, exactly where we need to start our work in this new era. This is the revolution. The revolution that the spirit leads, while the intellect and the emotions are simply its servants. That's it. Anyone who hasn't understood this will never be able to understand why it's possible to be monogamous and be extremely happy. because, as I said at the beginning of this lecture, only the spirit is monogamous. But despite the fact that we all see everything collapsing, there's still this longing to find that one and only man or that one and only woman. Many people still have this longing. And where does this longing come from? From the spirit. Sure, the intellect and the emotions will say, there's no such thing as an eternal love. You should go on Tinder. You can do this. You can do that. But the spirit knows something about eternity. And so it keeps searching. Among those whose spirit spark hasn't been extinguished yet, they are still searching for their one and only. Searching for love that lasts forever, that has unconditional loyalty and purity. And these people's intuition has been sensing for a very long time that something in our society is deeply wrong. For example, look at how these people view wedding celebrations. Give me a thumbs up if you identify with what I'm about to describe. They get invited to weddings, they go, and they sense that something about these weddings just isn't right. The bride is often half naked, if not completely naked. Does this seem right to you? A bride on her wedding day, she's supposed to be marrying someone. Why does she need to show her body to the entire world? And her future husband is actually excited about it. Then there are enormous amounts of food that end up getting thrown away because nobody can eat that much. People are smoking joints. How can you be happy without getting high? That doesn't make sense to many people, so everyone gets stoned. You have to bring a huge check as a gift just to cover the cost of your meal. I don't know if this happens where you live, but in some places, people don't know whether to attend weddings anymore because the check they need to bring to cover their meal becomes a very serious expense. But there's nothing you can do. If weddings are run this way, you need a fat check to cover all this extravagance. And this whole event makes people with intuition feel very uncomfortable and disturbed. Why do you need all this showing off? You need it because it's meant to cover up the sad truth that there's no real love here. There is no genuine intimacy here. Just think about the word intimacy. Intimacy is something you protect, something you guard. It's not something you display to the whole world. It's the holy of holies. It's a sacred, private space. Marriage should be like the holy of holies. Only the golden calf, only the worship of Baal gets exposed and flaunted publicly. And this public flaunting of what should be sacred, this is the very essence of licentiousness. So, right from the beginning, when we go to these weddings, not to mention the deafening noise, you also need lots and lots of noise to cover up all this emptiness, this void. And that's why those of us with intuition sense that something here is deeply wrong. Now, the time has come when everyone with spiritual consciousness should be experiencing the happiest period of their lives. Let me ask the Alma students, the graduates, is this the happiest time in your lives? Yes. Why? People who don't study at Alma don't understand this. What exactly could be happy about what's happening right now? It's incredibly joyful because all these lies and all this falsehood are collapsing. Our intuition about these things, about everything that's been wrong, will be proven right. We're going to receive confirmation for everything we sensed was wrong. And then we'll also discover that a match made in heaven, this concept, isn't a fairy tale and it's not some outdated idea whose time has passed. It really exists. So let's move on to chapter 5, a match made in heaven. To clarify and illuminate the meaning of this concept, I want to share with you part of lesson number 9 from the course Let My Spirit Go, which is dedicated to understanding relationships from a spiritual perspective. I want us to read together the section that explains the expression, a match made in heaven. The concept of a match made in heaven suggests that starting from birth, each person possesses certain characteristics that can only develop harmoniously through someone with compatible traits, not identical, but complementary. However, this doesn't mean that there's only one person in the world with whom you can have a harmonious marriage. Rather, there are typically several people who possess the complementary characteristics you need. So, there's no need to spend decades searching the world for the one and only. So, this doesn't contradict what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, the moment you find this person, you don't need anyone else. But yes, there are several people. Most people have several potential partners who could complete them toward transcendence. And there are people who truly have only one. This is my case. I don't have many options, so I'm lucky I found my one and only. When a person lives with an authentic connection to his spirit, he naturally resonates at a certain energetic frequency, and therefore, through the law of attraction between similar species, he will attract and be attracted to his complementary partner. So, there's no need to go searching anywhere. This is my advice to women who want to find their soulmate. Simply be yourselves in your most royal splendor and majesty as queen women. And then the law of attraction will draw to you the man who's right for you. But that's already information for the Queen Seminar. This type of love involves a magnetic connection between two spirits from the very first moment, far beyond a mere romantic story of falling in love. The love between a match made in heaven has a quality that is out of this world. Therefore, those who find such true love often communicate telepathically. They live in harmony with one another and share endless, deep conversations. He and she perfectly complement each other towards spiritual ascent and mutual fulfillment, and they share a profound intimacy. Often, this connection continues from previous lifetimes. This bond is so extraordinary that both partners feel it's too good to be true, fearing they might wake up to find it was just a dream. Since most of us aren't connected to our spirit, such a spiritual encounter is very rare. But when it occurs, no other relationship can compare. When a man and a woman taste this kind of true love, they know something about love that most people never will. They experience what a marriage covenant truly means, according to the plan of creation. And therefore, they can also vow before God, together with you, upward toward the light. It's beautiful to see this essence in the literal meaning of the Hebrew word niswin, marriage, because niswin means to be lifted up, to rise toward the divine. It's not about taking out a 30-year mortgage together. The Hebrew word itself contains this code, the essence of marriage as a shared ascent upward. So, if you've stayed with me until here, we'll reach chapter 6 now, and we'll reach the great secret to everlasting, joyful marriage. There's one short, profound sentence in the Talmud that describes this secret, man and woman. If they merit it, divine presence dwells between them. If they do not merit, fire consumes them. So let's explain. In Hebrew, the words for man, ish, and woman, isha, share two common letters, aleph and shin, which together form the word esh, meaning fire, symbolizing anger or conflict. The two differing letters are yud from ish and hey from isha, which together form yah, the first two letters of God's name. So what's the code here? Actually, in Hebrew, the word to merit doesn't just mean winning. It also means to acquire, to achieve something through effort and work. So, if the couple has merited purifying their ego from the relationship, and the ego, by the way, consists of emotions and intellect together, and they're living from their spiritual consciousness, then the divine presence dwells between them. This means that God's blessing flows and rests within them. But if they haven't merited this, meaning their entire relationship is conducted from their emotions and intellect, that is, from their ego, then God's blessing cannot dwell within them. What remains between them is only ego, a fire that will consume them in endless fights and arguments. So, whoever wants an eternally joyful marriage, one of constant growth, of love that not only doesn't end or gradually fade, but keeps growing stronger. Such a marriage can happen only, here's the secret, when each partner individually puts God first, the aspiration, the yearning for God, the yearning for the light, before everything else in their life. Meaning, contrary to romantic infatuation, where we place our beloved as an idol, and then the idol disappoints us and we replace it. In a spiritual marriage, each spouse lives by the first commandment of the 10 Commandments. This, by the way, is good advice for everyone, and this isn't my recommendation, this is Moses' recommendation, who brought down this commandment and told us, don't place anything in your life above God. Not money, not the body, not your profession, not your children, and also not your spouse. Because only God is the source of power. So, follow the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. And this too we explain in detail in other lectures and courses. But the secret for eternal love is to love God more than we love anything else in life. And then, if both spouses aspire upward and they are united in their shared aspiration, in uniting complementary forces, they create a much greater power, which is an eternal power. Now I want to break down this secret into details, really give you a step-by-step breakdown of the explanation. So the first step, those who place God above everything else in their life, what results from this is that. Step 2, they also align themselves by their own free will to God's will, which is the laws of creation. Stay with this for a moment. I want you to understand this, step by step. If God is in first place, then I also live according to His laws. And if I live according to His laws, or according to God's will, then the third step is that I have nullified my will before God's will. Whoever is in postmodernist mode immediately opposes this. Why should I nullify my will? What happened? But I'm only nullifying my ego, not my true will, because the true will of the Spirit is always to do the Creator's will. If the Spirit were not imprisoned by the intellect and the emotions, it is like a cork that floats upward, and the only thing it wants to do is the will of its Creator, because that is what brings it joy. That is what brings all of us joy. So when we re-educate ourselves, we should actually reach a state where we have only spiritual consciousness. And the spiritual consciousness says, I have no will of my own. I only have God's laws. So I have made God's will my own will. And then comes stage number 4. If I truly live like this, if I truly reach this level, and this is a level we all should strive for, because once we decide to walk this path, we must actually do the walking. Then it means I have no personal will, and therefore I am a person completely without selfishness. I have no ego. I'm not saying I personally have no ego, I still have work to do, but that's the plan. If two people, a man and woman, meet and they are without ego and they are completely without selfishness, then what exactly can they fight about? If they still fight, it's because they need to clean the remnants of their ego, the remnants of their wrong consciousness. And even a couple that is a match made in heaven has some fine-tuning to do. There are finishing touches that need to be done. But generally, if people go in this direction, and not just in relationships, but in all areas of life, if we all submit our personal will to the laws, and we truly understand what this means, then only harmony can prevail among us in every project. And from this comes prosperity, success, and abundance. This was the plan of creation for us, not that we should suffer here. We brought the suffering upon ourselves when we decided we know better than God what's good for us, when we expelled God from among us, when we decided we know better, exactly like Lucifer. So, this is the secret. This is the secret to joyful marriage, to put God above. When both partners live naturally according to the laws of creation and both aspire toward the same destination, toward the light, then they simply cannot help but live in harmony, joy, and mutual service. As day by day their spiritual consciousness ascends to another level, drawing closer to God. Chapter 7. Our last one. The ego dies and the spirit is set free. Only if we give up the ego, burn out the ego, can we truly know what love is, and not only between romantic partners, but in general. And therefore, this is the question I ask at the end of almost every lecture of mine lately. By the way, this is the question we all need to ask in the new era. Will we choose to continue feeding the transient ego, the emotions and intellect, or will we burn it out so that our eternal spirit can finally be set free after thousands of years of oppression? So ego or spirit? That's the question. And this is a question everyone can ask themselves and answer alone. Goethe wrote a very beautiful poem called Blessed Longing. I especially love the end of his poem. The poet is German, of course, for those who don't know. And as long as, he says, you don't have this movement of dying, killing the ego and becoming, because only then are we truly who we're supposed to be. And as long as you don't have this, dying and becoming, you are but a gloomy guest upon the dark earth. So I hope that in this lecture, in this lesson, your spirit received power and was ignited. And I wish for you that if this was truly the case, that you use these moments of grace to overcome the intellect and emotions that oppose the truth, oppose the new way, and set out on the path. Because ultimately, the path to true love is the reason we all came here, to find this love, or more accurately, to be it. So, thank you very much. Have a good week.